I used to believe that if you worked hard, stayed honest, and lived within your means, your family would respect you. I was wrong. The night my father laughed at my modest lifestyle, he didn't just mock my apartment or my car, he erased me. Standing in a luxury hotel lobby, surrounded by strangers, he smiled and said, "We only need real family this Christmas." Not quietly. Not privately. He wanted people to hear it. In that moment, I realized something far more painful than being excluded from a holiday. To my own father, I wasn't family anymore. I was an embarrassment. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't beg for a room or for dignity. I walked out with my head high, believing that was the end of it. What my father didn't know was that my grandfather saw everything. And once he stepped in, the life my father had built on arrogance and entitlement began to unravel slowly, legally, and beyond repair. My name is Isabella Carter, and for as long as I can remember, I've been aware of one painful truth. My father was never proud of me. Not openly. Not quietly. Not even when I did everything right. Growing up, my father, Richard, had a very clear definition of success. It wasn't about peace of mind or personal fulfillment. It was about how things looked from the outside, the size of your house, the brand of your car, the kind of lifestyle you could display at family gatherings without having to explain yourself. I didn't fit that image, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to. While other people chased appearances, I chased security. I went to a public university, worked part-time through college, and graduated without asking my parents for financial help. I chose a steady career in finance, not because it sounded impressive, but because I understood numbers, risk, and long-term planning. I learned early that independence wasn't glamorous, but it was powerful. To my father, that made me boring. At family dinners, he would make comments that sounded casual but always landed like quiet judgments. "Isabella, you're still renting?" he'd ask, smiling politely while everyone else listened. "Don't you want more for yourself?" Sometimes he'd glance at my clothes, simple, clean, unbranded, and chuckle. "You dress like someone who's afraid of success," he once joked. People laughed. I smiled. That smile became a habit. A shield. A way to survive conversations where defending myself would only make things worse. My mother, Susan, never joined in, but she never stopped him either. When my father spoke, she stayed busy adjusting napkins, refilling drinks, finding excuses to leave the room. Her silence hurt almost as much as his words. It told me that peace mattered more to her than protecting her own daughter. And yet, every time I tried to explain myself to talk about saving, investing, planning for the future, my father waved it off. "That's not living," he'd say. "That's hiding." The irony was that I wasn't hiding at all. I was building something stable, quietly, without shortcuts or handouts. I paid my bills. I maxed out my retirement accounts. I lived within my means. I slept well at night. But none of that counted to him. To my father, success had to be loud, visible, applauded. If no one was impressed, then it wasn't worth anything. The only person who ever seemed to understand my choices was my grandfather, George. He didn't talk much during family gatherings, but he watched everything. When my father mocked my lifestyle, Grandpa never laughed. Sometimes he'd clear his throat sharply or change the subject. Other times, he'd catch my eye and give me a subtle nod, small gestures that told me I wasn't crazy for valuing a different kind of life. Once, after dinner, when everyone else had left the table, Grandpa leaned toward me and said quietly, "Living within your means isn't weakness, it's discipline. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I held on to that sentence for years, because no matter how independent I became, my father continued to treat me like a disappointment waiting to be corrected. Every promotion I earned was met with a shrug. Every milestone I reached came with a reminder of what I didn't have yet. A bigger place. A flashier car. A lifestyle he could brag about. I told myself it didn't matter. That I didn't need his approval. That I was strong enough to stand on my own. But deep down, a part of me still believed that one day, if I proved myself enough, he would finally see me as his daughter, not an embarrassment. I had no idea that instead of seeing me, he was already preparing to erase me. Christmas had always been complicated in my family. On the surface, it looked warm and traditional, matching sweaters, carefully planned dinners, photos taken from the right angles. But underneath, it was always about status, about who had achieved the most that year, who had upgraded their lifestyle, who had something impressive to announce at the table. That year was no different. In early December, my mother sent a short message to the family group chat. Dad booked the Christmas trip, ski resort in Colorado. Please keep your schedule clear. That was it. No details. No itinerary. No room assignments. Normally, that wouldn't have bothered me. I trusted my grandfather. He had never excluded anyone before. Family unity mattered deeply to him, sometimes to a fault. Still, something about the message felt off. When I called my mother to ask about logistics, her answers were vague. "Oh, your father is handling the arrangements," she said quickly. "Everything's taken care of." "Do you know where I'm staying?" I asked. There was a pause. Not long, but noticeable. "I'm sure it'll be fine, Isabella," she replied. "You always worry too much." That sentence followed me for days. At work, as colleagues chatted excitedly about their holiday plans, I found myself distracted. I double-checked my vacation approval. I booked my drive up to the resort. I packed sensibly, nothing flashy, nothing expensive. Just warm clothes, a neat coat, and the same quiet confidence I'd learned to rely on. A small part of me wondered if I should call my father directly, but I didn't. Over the years, I'd learned that asking him for clarity often invited judgment. Questions were interpreted as insecurity. Preparation was mistaken for doubt. So I stayed quiet. A week before Christmas, I overheard my father on the phone during a family dinner. "Yes, of course," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "This year needs to feel elevated." I pretended not to listen. Later, when I was helping clear the table, I asked casually, "Dad, how many rooms did Grandpa book?" He glanced at me briefly. "Enough," he said. That was all. I remember standing at the sink afterward, my hands submerged in warm water, staring at the reflection of the kitchen lights. I felt something tightening in my chest, not fear exactly, but anticipation, the kind that comes when you sense something is about to go wrong but can't yet name it. The drive to the resort was long and quiet. Snow lined the roads, and the mountains rose ahead of me, beautiful and intimidating. I arrived just after sunset, exhausted but relieved. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe I'd been overthinking everything. That belief lasted until I stepped into the lobby. The place was stunning, high ceilings, stone fireplaces, people wrapped in designer winter gear laughing loudly as they checked in. I adjusted my coat, lifted my bag, and walked confidently to the front desk. "Hi," I said with a polite smile. "I'm checking in. Isabella Carter." The receptionist typed, paused, typed again. Her smile faltered slightly. "Just one moment," she said, her fingers moving faster now. She leaned toward her screen, frowned, then tried again. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "I'm not seeing a reservation under that name." My stomach dropped. "Could it be under my grandfather's name?" I asked. "George Carter?" She nodded and searched again. Nothing. She apologized and called her supervisor. Behind me, the lobby grew quieter. People shifted impatiently. I could feel eyes on my back. I stood still, telling myself to breathe, and then I heard it. A laugh. Not loud. Not accidental. Familiar. "Well, isn't this awkward?" I turned slowly. My father stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, a satisfied smile on his face. My mother was beside him, her expression unreadable. My grandfather was nowhere in sight. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. My father tilted his head, studying me like a puzzle he'd already solved. "Oh, Isabella," he said lightly. "We didn't think you'd make it this far." And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was planned. And whatever was about to happen next was going to hurt far more than I had prepared for. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. I stood there in the middle of the lobby, my suitcase still by my feet, the sound of crackling firewood echoing behind me. Around us, strangers pretended not to stare, but they were watching. I could feel it in the silence, the way conversations nearby had softened, the way people slowed their steps as they passed. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. My voice didn't shake, but my hands did. My father sighed, as if I were the inconvenience. "Well," he said, lowering his voice just enough to sound reasonable. "There were only so many rooms. Grandpa wanted this trip to feel special." I was invited, I replied. Grandpa told me himself. He smiled. Not kindly, not apologetically. The kind of smile someone wears when they believe they're in control. Yes, he said. But invitations don't always mean inclusion. Example. My mother shifted beside him, her fingers twisting together. She still wouldn't look at me. So where am I supposed to stay? I asked. My father glanced around the lobby, then leaned closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne. That depends, he said. Do you really belong here? The question hit harder than I expected. I'm your daughter, I said quietly. He straightened, his voice rising now, confident that the moment belonged to him. Isabella, he said, chuckling. You live in a small apartment, drive an old car, and work a job that barely keeps you comfortable. This resort? He gestured broadly to the marble floors, the designer coats, the luxury all around us. This isn't your world. A few heads turned. I felt heat rush to my face, but I forced myself to stay still. So, you decided to exclude me? I asked. Without telling me? He shrugged. Someone had to make the hard choice. My chest tightened. And Grandpa? I asked. Does he know? His smile widened. We didn't want to bother him with unnecessary details, he said smoothly. He trusts me to handle family logistics. That word again. Family. I looked at my mother then, searching for something, anything. Mom, I said. You knew about this? She swallowed. I thought it would be easier this way, she whispered. Easier? For who? The supervisor from the front desk hovered nearby, clearly uncomfortable. Other guests openly stared now. I could feel their curiosity, their judgment, their sympathy, and it made everything worse. My father turned slightly, his voice loud enough for the lobby to hear. Let's be honest, he said. This Christmas is about real family, about people who've actually built something. Then he looked directly at me and delivered the sentence that shattered whatever illusion I still had. We only need real family. The words hung in the air. For a moment, I couldn't hear anything else, not the fireplace, not the murmurs, not my own breathing. Real family. I felt something break inside me, not loudly, not dramatically, but cleanly, like a final thread snapping. So, that's it? I asked. After everything, that's what I am to you? My father crossed his arms. You're being emotional, he said. This is exactly why you never get ahead. I nodded slowly. Not because I agreed, but because I understood. This wasn't about rooms, or money, or Christmas. This was about power. And right then, standing in that lobby, I realized something strange. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. I reached for my phone and opened a ride-sharing app. My father frowned. What are you doing? Leaving, I said simply. My mother finally looked at me, panic flickering across her face. Isabella, don't be dramatic, she said. We can talk about this. I met her eyes. We are talking, I replied. You're just not listening. I turned back to my father one last time. Enjoy your Christmas, I said calmly. And make sure you explain to Grandpa why I won't be at breakfast tomorrow. For the first time that night, his confidence faltered. He'll understand, he said quickly. I smiled. Not out of kindness, but certainty. I'm sure he will, I said. Then I picked up my bag and walked out into the cold. And as the doors closed behind me, I had no idea that my father had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The cold hit me the moment I stepped outside. Snow crunched beneath my boots as I pulled my coat tighter around myself, my breath coming out in short white clouds. The resort doors closed behind me with a soft final sound like a chapter ending. I stood there for a moment, staring at the glowing windows, wondering how something so warm on the inside could feel so hostile. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother. Please don't do this. Let's talk tomorrow. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I finally understood something I'd spent years refusing to see. Any conversation that required me to shrink myself just to be included was never really a conversation at all. The ride back down the mountain was quiet. The driver didn't ask questions, and I was grateful for that. As the lights of the resort disappeared behind us, my thoughts became clearer than they had been in years. My father had always believed I needed him, that I needed his approval. That without him, I'd fall apart. But sitting there in the back seat, watching the road unwind ahead of me, I felt steady. Hurt, but steady. and that scared me more than the humiliation ever had. When I got back to my apartment, it was close to midnight. I dropped my bag by the door, kicked off my boots, and sat on the edge of my couch in the silence. No decorations, no music, just the hum of the heater and my own breathing. That's when I called my grandfather. "Isabella?" he answered, his voice warm but surprised. "Why aren't you at the resort?" I hesitated, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew how much my words were about to change everything. "I'm not there," I said carefully. "I was never supposed to be." There was a pause. I told him everything. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't raise my voice. I described the missing reservation, my father's words, my mother's silence, and the moment I was told I wasn't part of the real family. When I finished, the line stayed quiet. Too quiet. Finally, my grandfather spoke, and his tone was no longer gentle. "Did your father really say that?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "In front of strangers." Another pause. Longer this time. "I see," he said slowly. I waited, my heart pounding. I had no idea what he was thinking, only that the man on the other end of the line had built his entire life on fairness, accountability, and respect. "I don't want you to worry about this tonight," he said at last. "Go home, rest." "Grandpa," I said quickly, "I don't want you to confront anyone because of me." There was a soft, humorless chuckle. "This isn't because of you," he said. "This is because of choices." He sighed. "Come to my office Monday morning," he continued. "Bring your laptop. We need to talk about some things I've been putting off for too long." I swallowed. "I'll be there," I said. After the call ended, I sat there for a long time, staring at the dark screen of my phone. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. What I felt was something far more unsettling. I knew deep down that my father believed this was over, that I would cool down, forgive, and quietly fade back into the role I'd always played. He had no idea that by humiliating me, he had finally pushed the situation into the light. And once my grandfather started looking at the truth, really looking at it, there would be no way to put it back in the dark. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without the weight of needing anyone's approval, and somewhere up the mountain my father was enjoying Christmas, completely unaware that the foundation beneath his life had already begun to crack. My grandfather's office felt different on Monday morning. The walls were lined with old photographs, construction sites from decades ago, ribbon cuttings, handshakes with people who had once doubted him. Everything in that room told a story of discipline, patience, and accountability. Values I had grown up respecting. Values my father liked to talk about but rarely practiced. Grandpa George was already seated when I arrived. He didn't smile. "Sit down, Isabella," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I opened my laptop, my hands steady despite the knot forming in my stomach. I had helped him organize his finances for years, digitizing records, reviewing accounts, setting up systems to protect what he'd built. I knew the numbers. I knew the patterns. But I had never seen him look this resolved. "I want to understand something," he began slowly. "I want to understand how my son became so comfortable, humiliating his own daughter." I took a breath. "Grandpa," I said, "before we talk about that, there's something you need to see." I pulled up the files. At first, he said nothing. He leaned forward, reading carefully. Bank transfers, monthly support payments, emergency loans, debt coverage. Year after year after year, my father's name appeared again and again. "So it wasn't just help," Grandpa said quietly. "It was dependence." "Yes," I replied. "And it's been going on for over a decade." I showed him the totals. The number sat there on the screen, undeniable. More than $500,000. His jaw tightened. "And during all that time," he said, "he was criticizing you for being independent." I nodded. "He told me I was living small," I said softly. "He never mentioned that his lifestyle depended on money he didn't earn." Grandpa leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was calm, but there was an edge to it I had never heard before. "Do you know why I trusted you with my finances?" he asked. I shook my head. "Because you never asked for anything," he said. "You worked with what you had. You planned. You prepared. You respected the effort it took to build something." He looked directly at me. "Your father forgot that. We went through everything. Slowly. Methodically. Not with anger, but with clarity. Each document told the same story. A man who spoke about strength while quietly relying on support. A man who mocked restraint while benefiting from generosity. By the end of the meeting, the sun had shifted across the office floor. Grandpa closed the final folder and folded his hands. "I'm calling a family meeting," he said. "Everyone will be there." My heart skipped. "I don't want this to turn into a fight," I said carefully. "It won't," he replied. "This isn't about emotions, it's about consequences." I thought of my father, how confident he had looked in that hotel lobby, how certain he was that I had no power. He had believed the story he told himself for years, that I was weak, that I needed him, that he could decide who counted as family. He had no idea that the foundation of his life, the comfort, the stability, the authority he wielded, was built on something he could lose. And he had no idea that I was about to watch him face the truth he'd spent years avoiding. Not through shouting, not through revenge, but through facts. And once facts enter the room, there's nowhere left to hide. The family meeting was scheduled for Saturday morning. Grandpa didn't frame it as a confrontation. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten anyone. He simply said, "If you want to be part of this family moving forward, you'll be there." That alone was enough to guarantee attendance. When I arrived at his house, the air already felt heavy. The living room looked the same as it always had, neatly arranged, familiar, comforting. But the energy inside it was completely different. There were folders stacked on the coffee table, each labeled carefully in my grandfather's handwriting. My father arrived last. Richard walked in with his usual confidence, coat draped over his arm, expression relaxed, almost amused. He greeted Grandpa warmly, nodded at me without really looking, and sat down like this was just another routine conversation. "All right," he said lightly, glancing around. "What's this about?" Grandpa didn't answer immediately. He waited until everyone was seated, until the room was quiet, until my father had stopped smiling. "I asked you all here," Grandpa began, "because I've been reviewing my finances, and theA'd be scary and—" My father leaned back. "Okay," he said. "That's smart. We've been meaning to talk about long-term planning anyway." Grandpa looked directly at him. "We are," he replied. "Just not in the way you're expecting." He slid a folder across the table straight toward my father. "Open it." Richard hesitated for the first time. Then he laughed softly. "Dad, if this is about money, you know we've always appreciated." "Open it," Grandpa repeated. The laughter faded. My father flipped open the folder. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. His posture stiffened. His jaw tightened. The room was silent except for the sound of pages turning. "What is this?" he asked finally. "Those," Grandpa said calmly, "are records of every transfer I've made to you over the past 12 years. My father scoffed. "So?" he said. "You helped your family. That's what fathers do." "Yes," Grandpa agreed. "They help. They don't enable." He turned to the next folder and pushed it toward my mother. "And these," he continued, "are the amounts that were never repaid, the temporary support that became permanent." My mother's face went pale. Richard closed his folder sharply. "Why are you bringing this up now?" he demanded. "This has nothing to do with Isabella." I felt my heart pound, but Grandpa didn't even glance at me. "It has everything to do with Isabella," he said evenly. My father's head snapped toward me. "This is about her?" he snapped. "You're really doing this because she couldn't handle a simple misunderstanding?" I spoke before I could stop myself. "It wasn't a misunderstanding," I said. "It was a decision. It's to say." He turned fully toward me now, his voice sharp. "You're exaggerating," he said. "You always do. You make everything emotional." Grandpa raised a hand. "No," he said. "She didn't exaggerate anything." He looked back at my father. "She told me exactly what you said, exactly how you said it, and exactly where." Richard's face flushed. "I was trying to be practical," he argued. "That resort was expensive. She wouldn't have been comfortable there anyway." I felt something twist in my chest. "You didn't give me a choice," I said quietly. "You decided I didn't belong." My father waved me off. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You're an adult. You can take care of yourself." "Yes," Grandpa said. "She can, and she does." He leaned forward now, his voice still calm but unmistakably firm. "What you don't seem to understand, Richard, is that independence is not a flaw. He tapped the folder in front of my father. What is a flaw, he continued, is living off someone else's support while mocking the person who doesn't. My father stood up abruptly. So what is this? He demanded. An ambush? A lecture? It's an accounting, Grandpa replied. And it's long overdue. He turned to me. Isabella, he said, would you explain what you found when we reviewed the records together? Every eye in the room turned toward me. My pulse thundered in my ears, but my voice came out steady. For 12 years, I said. Grandpa covered mortgage payments, credit balances, and monthly expenses. There were emergency transfers, labeled as one-time help, that happened repeatedly. I paused. The total support exceeded $600,000. I mean, this is option, and I did make free. My father laughed sharply. So, what? He said. That's between you and him. No, Grandpa said. It's between values and consequences. He stood then slowly, deliberately. I built my life believing that family meant accountability, he said. I was wrong to ignore what this had become. My father's confidence was gone now. His voice dropped. What are you saying? He asked. I'm saying, Grandpa replied, that effective immediately, all financial support stops. The words landed like a final verdict. My mother gasped. You can't do that, my father said, his voice rising. We rely on that money. Grandpa met his gaze. And that, he said quietly, is exactly the problem. The room felt like it was closing in. My father looked around as if searching for backup, but there was none. This isn't fair, he said finally. Grandpa nodded once. No, he agreed. It isn't. And it hasn't been for a very long time. Silence filled the room. And in that silence, I realized something profound. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't punishment. This was the truth finally spoken out loud. And once spoken, it could never be taken back. The room stayed silent long after my grandfather finished speaking. No one shouted. No one stormed out. There was no dramatic explosion, just the slow, terrifying realization that something permanent had just happened. My father was the first to move. He sank back into his chair, running a hand through his hair like he was trying to wake himself from a bad dream. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. You can't just cut us off. We're family. Grandpa didn't raise his voice. Family doesn't mean dependency, he said. And it doesn't mean entitlement. My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling. George, we didn't know things had gotten this bad. Grandpa looked at her gently, but firmly. You didn't ask, he replied. And when you don't ask, you don't get to claim innocence. My father stood up again, pacing now. So what? He snapped. You expect us to just figure it out overnight? I expect you to do what Isabella has done for years, Grandpa answered. Live within your means. That sentence seemed to drain the last bit of fight from him. He turned to me then, not with anger but something closer to panic. You could have stopped this, he said. You knew about the money. You didn't have to let it go this far. I took a breath. I didn't let anything happen, I replied. I told the truth when I was asked. He stared at me, searching my face for guilt. There was none. The meeting ended without resolution, only reality. Over the next few weeks, the consequences unfolded quietly. My father called first. He left a voicemail, his tone careful, rehearsed. Isabella, your grandfather's overreacting. This will blow over. We just need time. It didn't. Bills began to pile up. Accounts were restructured. Spending habits that had never been questioned suddenly mattered. My mother called next. She cried. I didn't mean for things to turn out like this, she said. I didn't realize how much we relied on your grandfather. I know, I said softly. But that doesn't make it my responsibility to fix. There was a pause. I'm sorry, she whispered. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was the first real one I'd ever received. My father waited longer. When he finally called, his voice was stripped of confidence. We're struggling, he admitted. I could use your help. You're good with numbers. Maybe you could talk to your grandfather. I closed my eyes. For years, I said calmly, you told me I lived too small, that I wasn't ambitious enough, that I wasn't real family. He didn't respond. I can help you plan, I continued. I can't ask him to undo his decision. He exhaled sharply. So, you're just going to let us fall? No, I said. I'm letting you stand on your own. The line went quiet. Months passed. My father sold the house, downsized, adjusted. It wasn't easy. It wasn't painless. But it was necessary. And something unexpected happened. He stopped laughing at my lifestyle. Not because he suddenly understood it, but because he finally had to live it. A year has passed since that Christmas. Life didn't magically fix itself for my family. There was no sudden reconciliation, no dramatic apology scene, no movie-perfect ending, but there was change. My father learned how to budget. Really budget. Not the kind where numbers are suggestions, but the kind where every expense has a consequence. He stopped talking about success like it was a performance and started understanding it as something fragile, something that has to be maintained. My mother became quieter, more reflective. She stopped avoiding hard conversations. When we talk now, there's less pretending and more honesty. It's not perfect, but it's real. As for my grandfather, he never once apologized for what he did because he didn't need to. He protected the values he spent a lifetime building, and for the first time, he made it clear that respect mattered more than bloodlines or appearances. One afternoon, a few months ago, he said something to me that I'll never forget. "You know," he said, "I always worried about what would happen to this family when I wasn't around." He looked at me and smiled gently. "I worry less now." That was the moment I finally understood something important. Walking away that night wasn't weakness. Living modestly wasn't failure. And silence wasn't submission. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is refuse to accept a role that diminishes you, especially when the people assigning it call themselves family. I still live in the same apartment. I still drive the same car. I still plan, save, and build quietly. The difference is this: I no longer need anyone's approval to know my worth. And if there's one thing this experience taught me, it's this. Real family doesn't laugh at your struggles. Real family doesn't erase you when you don't impress them. And real family never makes you earn the right to belong. That Christmas, I was excluded. But I didn't lose my family. I found myself,